Today I'm very excited to welcome author James Parker, celebrating the release of Get Me Through the Next 5 Minutes, Odds of Being Alive. James Parker is a staff writer at The Atlantic. Since 2011, he's run the Backseat Writers Group, a weekly writing workshop for homeless, transitional, and recently housed writers, and edited The Pilgrim, a literary magazine from the homeless community of downtown Boston. He lives in Boston, Massachusetts. Parker will be in conversation with Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic and the moderator of Washington Week with The Atlantic. He joined The Atlantic in 2007 as a national correspondent and in 2016 was named the magazine's 15th editor-in-chief. In 2020, Goldberg was named Editor of the Year by Adweek, which also named The Atlantic Magazine of the Year. Goldberg is the author of The Prisoner, A Story of Friendship and Terror. Without further ado, please welcome James and Jeffrey.
Hello, hello.
I didn't hear what he said about us. What did he say about us? Thank you all for being here. Welcome to Politics and Prose, Wharf Division. It's great to be here. It's great to be here with my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Parker. All of the writers at The Atlantic are my favorite writers. But if this were Animal Farm, you would be one of my favorite writers within the group of favorite. Actually, one of my favorite writers in the world. He consistently delights, and you know, and it's the test of whether a James Parker piece is working. For me, is whether I start laughing out loud by myself within the first 3 or 4.
Because they don't all work.
Sentences. No, and sometimes I say, and I write to your editor, and it's the hard bigotry of high expectations, I guess, because I will write to your editor, and I say I didn't laugh out loud once in the first 4 paragraphs. So it's a tough role. But you'll see tonight. I'm going to ask James to read various embarrassing odes. Some not embarrassing, some uplifting, one embarrassing one. And you'll see what I'm talking about. No one, I shouldn't say no one, very few people I know emit pure liquid language the way James does. I once asked him, actually, those of you who are in the Atlantic will remember, some of you will remember this. I asked him. We had a session with some of with the staff. I'd bring senior writers or senior editors to talk to everybody about what they do and their craft. And everybody wants to know how James writes. Everybody wants to know the process, right? In this session, included a lot of interns at the time. I asked James, what's the key to great writing? And his answer, which is now almost as famous in the history of The Atlantic as the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, was the most important thing is to take the exact right amount of drugs. But then being James, Yoda-like and kind of mysterious, he wouldn't tell anyone either what that right amount was, or, for that matter, which drugs. So the Atlantic over the last 7 or 8 years has just been an experiment to figure out what the James formula is. But maybe you could illuminate us on that.
Not tonight.
Not tonight. Not in this mixed crowd. But I want to start just by asking you to talk about the impetus for the book, and I guess it goes back to the impetus for the idea of writing these short, enthusiastic, wonderfully constructed odes.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I was incredibly lucky. I mean, like most things in my life, actually, and my career certainly, I sort of live by Morrissey's line: "You should never go to them; let them come to you." And that's how it's always been. All the good stuff has kind of come at me, and the odes, it wasn't really my idea. I mean, I was given this or offered this space in a back page of the magazine. And just like fill it with some kind of expostulation.
By the way, just magazine interesting aspect of magazine. The back page is the hardest page to program. People turn to it, especially in the bathroom. They go that way usually. They're looking for something quick. And I mean, we've done a million things. Word columns. I wrote an advice column for several years until I found myself making up letters from the Pope and realized that I had probably run out my string. And then then this idea came along.
Yeah. So the idea was to give the people give the reader a little sort of fillip on the way out. And we tried various things, and John Swansburg, my editor, said, why don't we just call them odes, ode to this, ode to that. So that's what I began to do. And quite quickly, the form sort of took over, and they became these little exercises in enthusiasm, I suppose, or gratitude, or just things that I enjoyed writing about. The space dictated the kind of brevity and attack in some cases. Not attack, I mean, that sounds a bit violent, but, like I do like to go at the reader a bit. And then it just developed from there. And then when I got the offer for the book, which again wasn't my idea, the editor said, how about a book of odes? And I said, well, I can't do, 80, 500-word odes. That'll drive the people insane. So I said, well, you can write long ones, you can write short ones. And I said, could I write one about being on ecstasy in a warehouse in Hackney in 1991? He said, oh, yes, perfect. So that's one of them. And some of them are poems and some of them are longer pieces. But yeah, I got carried along, and I've been carried to this point.
Right. Why don't you just to give people a
let's read one.
Read the Ode to America, which I think is, and then we'll move into darker, or at least more absurdist fare.
Okay, so this is Ode to America, and I've lived in America for about 26 years, I think. And this first line should be with an American accent, but I can't do a good one. Pretty good nose you got there. You do much fighting with that nose? New Orleans, 1989. I'm standing on a balcony south of the Garden District, and a man, a stranger, is hailing me from the street. He looks like Paul Newman, if Paul Newman was an alcoholic house painter. I don't, as it happens, do much fighting with this nose, but that's not the point. The point is that something about me, the particular young man way I was 24 at this point, the particular young man way I'm jutting into the world, physically, attitudinally, beak first, is being recognized. The actual contour of me, or so I feel, is being saluted for the first time. America, this is personal. I came to you as a cramped and nervous Brit, an overwound piece of English clockwork, and you laid your cities before me. The alcoholic house painter gave me a job, and it worked out pretty much as you might expect, given that I had never painted houses before, and he was an alcoholic. Nonetheless, I was at large. I was in American space. I could feel it spreading away unsteadily on either side of me. Raw innocence, potential harm, beckoning peaks, fat chasms, bouncing ions of luck, and threading through it, in and out of range, fantastic, dry bones laughter. No safety net anywhere, but rather, if I could only adjust myself to it, if I could be worthy of it, a crackling, sustaining levity. I blinked, and the baggage of history fell off me. Neurosis rolled down the hill. It rolled back up again later, but that's another story. America, it's true what they say about you, all the good stuff. I'd be allowed to do something here. I'd be encouraged to do something here. It will be demanded of me in the end that I do something here. Later that year, I'm in San Francisco, ripping up the carpets in someone's house. Sweaty work. Fun work if you don't have to do it all the time. I love the unzipping sound of a row of carpet tacks popping out of the hardwood floor. On our lunch break, my co-ripper and I gaze at the city skyline, at the shimmering spires, the dewy pavilions of San Francisco, and I say something about how good I'm feeling. He turns to me. Man, you should get paid just for that. They should pay you just for walking around this city with your head up. Only in America, believe me, do people say things like this. I've grown up here, in a way, become a man. Driving in America in the early days, I'd experience a phenomenon I named Ameripanic, an overwhelming, for a Brit, apprehension of distance, a kind of horizontal vertigo at the vastness and possibility of this great country, nausea at the wheel, called to be Neil Cassidy, feeling like proof rock. Not anymore. These days, at the wheel in America, I feel sort of, how shall I put it, American, sort of loose and large-souled. Dunkin' Donuts coffee, elbow out the window, classic rock on the radio. You know where you are, wherever you are, with a classic rock station. Cinnamon Girl, Sweet Emotion, War Pigs. It's a liturgy. Somewhere outside New York, on a bright winter morning, the DJ played 3 Led Zeppelin songs in a row. No commercials, a rock block, and I lost my mind. I was ecstatic. It was the Led Zeppness of driving in America, being in America, the wail and the thrust of it. The world seemed to crack open before me, a Hildegardian egg, a cosmic coal, with a tiny golden Robert plant squealing like a white-hot Buddha at its core. So, you fixed me up, America. Now, what can I do for you?
I'm trying to remember if that came. So one of the great things about James is, yeah, he does, on one hand, as you say, wait for things to happen. On the other hand, there are a lot of people around you who want things to happen with you, and you're very, very open to the suggestion of things. So when you told me you had to drive your kid's car across America for some unknown and obscure reason, I said, oh, you should just point it in the direction of trouble and go mix it up with all of America. Did the ode come before that?
This was before that.
That was before that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what prompted the, let's just have him, James, experience America. So I want to talk a bit, before we go to the next ode, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your relationship with this America that you discovered, this big, clanging, obnoxious, loud, beautiful, crazy.
Yeah.
Everything's large about it. I think one of the and America is the subject of many of these odes, even if it's not directly.
Yeah.
One of the in trying to think through what makes a writer great at a particular thing, I came to the realization that I have this belief, like many Americans, that English people know 20 to 30% more words than we do, and they know how to deploy them.
Oh no! See, I've got so far on my accent, it's obscene.
No. I mean, it's there. I come back to the word liquid because there's a liquid kind of writing where it pours.
Yeah.
And it's a particular skill. We could talk about your background and how you became a writer. But you marry that to this big, clanging, crazy experience, and good things happen. Is that?
Well, yeah. Well, where's Ian? Is he here? English Ian, who works? Yes. Ian, you know that English people do quite well in America. No, I mean we expand a little bit. It's a bit easier for us in some ways, especially if you're from Colchester, especially if you're from Saffron Walden. You can open up a little bit in this country. You're invited to open up. That's one of the beautiful things about America that Americans.
The sun drives you crazy at first, right? The lack of clouds.
But that's so. Leonard Cohen said that living in England was like living inside a cabbage, and that's I don't know how he understood that, but that's that's what it feels like to a degree. I mean, you're kind of hemmed in your identity. So English people burst into flames when they come over here in some ways. And I think Americans don't understand that because that's just how they are, and it's in the air around them, and they take it for granted. But it's very, very special. It's very special, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. And I'm also attracted, as a crunched up English person, to larger than life. I mean, larger than life to me just means life, basically. Like that's the level I think. I think all of life should be like pro wrestling. It should be like heavy metal. It should be happening at that level of intensity and theatricality all the time.
What I love about you is that you're not coming with condescension toward America.
I don't have any. I really don't. I'm in awe of this stuff.
Right, which is why I mean, and again, this goes to the sort of the process that we have between us and between you and John. It's I'll give you a perfect example, and I should probably read this. I should call this up. I just realized this. You all remember Four Seasons Total Landscaping? Yeah, and I was like, Four Seasons Total Landscaping was so absurd, only in America sort of thing. And I thought, oh my God, what we need is an epic poem about Four Seasons Total Landscaping.
This is my one truly viral moment
in
the history of me. I did have one.
Wait, I gotta
find it.
and it's not in here. It's not in the book. Yeah, that's a special add-on. Oh, yeah. Actually, Emily, who's our chief of staff, is on parental leave, but she can't help it. She just can't help being effective. She can't help being effective. So literally, and one of the great things about working with James is that you have more of this kind of enthusiasm, spontaneous enthusiasm that I suppose was not bred in you, but burst forth in America. So, in other words, when you're an editor and you call up a writer and say, "Hey, I have this really stupid idea," I know with James that James will, generally speaking, say, "Fuck yeah, let's do it." And then, like literally a half hour after we spoke, or an hour, I get this. I'll, if you don't mind me reading. America is loose as a goose. It avoided.
Wait, so this is right after the election.
Right after the election, right after the press conference outside Four Seasons Total Landscaping in Northeast Philadelphia. America is loose as a goose. It avoided becoming Belarus. But that sulking Caesar, POTUS, where's he gone? Is he watching Fox News with a big frown on? We'll seize the cycle. We'll make allegations. Reverse these numerical humiliations. It's Dr. Suits meets Rudy Giuliani. It's really astonishing. It's astonishing. A major press conference, that's the thing, at the Four Seasons Total Landscaping. So the gods of Bathos displayed us all on pickled asphalt by a lumpy green wall. The morning light so skeptically slanted, the scene so tawdry and disenchanted. Oh, flunkies, we're at oblivion's door. It's right next to Fantasy Island adult bookstore. By the twang of the dildo, by the Undertaker's shoes, some shall win and some shall lose. The dark portal is reached, bow down and enter, across from Delaware Valley Cremation Center.
That's pretty good.
It still works. And it only works because actually our democracy wasn't overthrown on January 6th, and we can still sort of laugh about, provisionally laugh about that sort of thing. So another aspect of editing James is that John Swansburg, his editor, will sometimes call me and say something like, actually say this actual thing, and I apologize if they're small children, and we'll just get our way through it. Said, so James, we want to run an ode to James's dog's balls. Can you think we can do that? And in my role, I have to think, what would the founders of the Atlantic do? What would Ralph Waldo Emerson do? What would, Longfellow would be for it, right? Oliver Wendell Holmes, definitely against. Emerson, it's part of nature or whatever. Thoreau would be. Emerson would have been like, yeah, write about dogs' balls. And I sort of said, and there's this relationship where it's like, I trust James, so you can do these sorts of things. And I thought maybe just to give our friends like a partial indication of your range, maybe you could read some of that particular ode.
Absolutely.
You'll see why it was a good decision.
Yeah, it's
100 years from now, somebody writes in the history of the Atlantic and said, one of the curious moments came when an English writer named James Parker, in the midst of America's democracy crisis. I have it, Mark.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a long one. So this is about my dog, Sonny.
You could pick and choose.
I'll pick and choose, yeah. But ode to my dog's balls. We couldn't take them from him. No, we couldn't do it. For Sonny the dog, castration was never an option. Nothing ideological about it. I know there are trainers and dog types who will advocate for an intact animal, but this was a purely emotional analysis. Sonny came to us from India, from the streets of Delhi, and the various ruptures and dislocations involved in getting him to our apartment had left him quivering, volatile, tender, spooked, curved in on himself, Ringo Starr-eyed, a little morbid and damp of soul. He arrived in January, in the glassy blue heart of a Massachusetts winter, and every cold, clarified sound on our street, cough clunk of a car door closing, sharp tingle of keys, made him jump. My wife said that taking him for a walk in those early days was like tripping on LSD. If we removed his balls, we felt, that would be the end of his personality. He'd curl up and blow away like a dead leaf. Like I said, emotional, non-rational. We should have neutered him, but we didn't. So he retains them, grandly and purply, his testes, his tokens, his clangers, his plums. And because of them, he gets a lot of grief in the neighborhood, and I mean a lot. Male dogs, with rare and shining exceptions, are outraged by him. They just cannot believe it. His free-swinging, low-hanging, full-bollocked lifestyle. The effrontery of it drives them out of their minds. From behind the windows of houses and apartment buildings, they roar at him, scrabbling at the glass or throwing themselves against it with furry thumps. From porches and balconies, they shriek at him. On the street, they snuffle with fury. They stand on their hind legs and choke on their leashes, desperate to fight. They hate the sight of Sonny. They hate the sight of me walking Sonny. So wherever we go, in addition to the squawks of the dog-detesting squirrels in their trees, we must suffer the heckling of the local castrati. Hostile world. Am I overstating it a bit? Subjectively speaking, not at all. Boston is a port city with gulls in the air, and sometimes I think even those gulls are against us, those wheeling, vituperating gulls. A little bit more. By breed, Sonny is a pariah or desi dog, slender, keen, and honey-coloured, around 35 pounds, with a narrow rib cage and flayed Iggy Pop-like musculature. One of the dogs of the planet, a dingo jackal hound, a traveller in packs, a sharp-witted middleweight, super-fast runner, beaky, brainy, built for the great unravelling, for broken cities and despairing populations. He is Canis Canis, God's mongrel and ultimately boiled-down compound animal. If all the animals in the world, I like saying this to fellow dog owners, had sex with all the other dogs, you'd end up with a dog like Sonny. In his person, he combines great elegance with something low-down and trash-inflected and all-surviving. He has a dainty, floaty way of walking, a fawn-like delicacy of limb, and an aesthetic approach to taking a shit. He has an affinity for ramps, alleys, doorways, neglected corners, loading bays, back areas. In these non-places, he looks very briefly at home. He's deeply suspicious, wildly alert, and absolutely reverent of reality. People who live on the street tend to greet him with a kind of recognition. At first, he wouldn't even walk with me. On the sidewalk, mid-stride, he'd stop, stiffen his forelegs, dip his head, and glower at me with a combination of sunken defiance and great sadness. The leash did not connect us. No, it divided us cruelly. Once, in the early days, I tried to take him to the liquor store. A man and his dog go to buy some whiskey. What could be nicer? And he balked on the leash after half a block. Dug in, bunched up, wouldn't move. The truculent stare. I cursed, I pulled, I wheedled. Nothing happened. We returned home, alienated him, and furious, me. Fuck it, I said. I can do without whiskey. You sure about that? Said my son, 13 at the time. It took a while to build trust. Months passed before Sonny would truly meet my eye. Long months for me. I'd stick my face hotly into his, looking for love. There's an endorphin released, or so I'd been reading, by the infatuated, beseeching gaze of one's dog. I had to have it. Was it down there somewhere, deep in the seas of his eyeball? Could I find it? Love? Love to twitch the neurochemical trigger and give me the juicy endorphins? No chance. No love for me, or not yet. Sonny, with an oppressed air, would look steadily away. We'll stop there. Anyway, there's more.
How did you learn how to write?
I had a very expensive education, and then I had a very chaotic young manhood. And I think those two things in
Go
combination.
slower. Take us through it a little
Okay,
bit.
so I went to sometimes when American people ask me where I'm from, I just say I'm from boarding school, because that gives you a much clearer idea of who I am than if I said Saffron Walden, which Ian knows about, but nobody else does. Because I was basically raised at boarding school. I went to boarding school when I was 8, and I came out the other end when I was 18. So these are all boys. The first one was Catholic, the second one was Anglican, and the teachers were monsters, some of them, and lovely men, some of them, and I got a pretty amazing education. I think what I probably the greatest gift I got from that was not even consider the possibility of being intimidated by any aspect of culture, anything I read, anything I came across. I would never be worried by it in the way that a lot of people are worried by it. So that was a huge, bonus head start. And then in London,
So was it just massive reading?
Early, yeah, massive early reading, exactly. And a couple of very sort of sympathetic teachers. And then I did these big trips to America in my 20s when I'd come over here and get jobs. I was a house painter in New Orleans. I worked for the Cirque du Soleil a couple of times. I worked at a homeless shelter here in DC for a few months. And then I go back to London. And then somewhere in there, I completely sort of collapsed, psychologically and spiritually. And that took quite a while to dig myself out of. But I think that was probably the making of me as a writer.
How did the writing? How did you get? What was the first time you were paid for writing?
I think I used to write. I wrote a friend of mine. That was the other thing. I went to Cambridge University, and while I was floundering in my 20s, my friends were diligently working their way up the publishing and media ladders. So when I got to the age of 27 and I was reasonably sort of competent again, they started giving me things to do. So I think the first thing I got paid for was for British Esquire, a film review probably.
And when did you realize that you could make a living from this?
That took probably when I came over. So when I came to America, I gave up writing for a bit. I got a bit sort of disgusted with the journalism that I was doing, so I became a baker for 5 years in Boston. But then I, like a vice, like a disease, writing sort of came back, and I found myself wanting to contribute things to the Boston Globe and the Boston Phoenix. And at a certain point, I kind of had to choose between baking and writing, and I chose writing, which I haven't always thought was the right choice, honestly.
No, economically, people need bread, but
and baking is a beautiful, beautiful job. Oh my God!
Right. Talk a little bit about. Well, I'm very curious. There's so much about you that's curious, but where does how do you bring this level of enthusiasm? I mean, the Odes are, as you suggested, they're the byproduct of a kind of almost wonder-eyed enthusiasm for whatever object you're talking about. I mean, you have an ode to Jason Bourne, which is, I mean, it's very interesting, and you could read some of that if you want. But how does where do you think the source of this enthusiasm is?
Well, I think a lot of it. I mean, I have a big part of me is kind of a depressive. Do you know what I mean? So I'm always pulling myself out of moods. And I've got various techniques to do that, and some of them work and some of them don't. But most of these odes is basically me talking to myself and getting. And I mean, writing. The beautiful thing about writing is that it's constantly calling you to pay closer attention, and your writing self is a version of your, if you can be in touch with it, as a version of your higher self. I do think it's definitely my writing self is more intelligent than I am. It's more sensitive than I am. So when that's going on, then I'm kind of in better shape. Right.
I want you to talk about something that I know well about you, but a lot of people don't, including those who read you. Some of them. You're part of two writing communities. You're the Atlantic, and then you have a very different kind of writing community in Boston. And talk about that for a minute, and talk about what you get from that.
So in 2011, me and some homeless writers started the Black Seed Writers Group, which we now meet every Tuesday morning, 9:30 to 10:45 in the basement of a cathedral in Boston, the Cathedral Church of St. Paul. And the spiel is, it's not a workshop, it's not a ministry, it's not social work, it's not therapy, it's a space to write. And that's really it. And that really has been, because it took us not that long to figure that out. And once we had figured that out, that I think became the reason that we've managed to keep going for so long. It's very, very simple. Hold the space, maintain the space, make sure it's a place of welcome, make sure it's a place of safety, and those two things are not always compatible by any means, but that's one of the tensions that you have to sort of live within. And we get 30 to 40 people a week, Seb's been, and it's an incredibly enriching, volatile, fascinating, endlessly interesting place. And I've known some of these guys. I've known for 10 years, 12 years. Some of them, there's new people every week. Basically, I never know what they're going to come up with. We have the pens, we have the paper. There's a little prompt sheet that I write, but you don't have to stick to the prompts, obviously. And I always say, when I'm trying to get somebody going, I always say, whatever is uppermost in your heart, in your body, in your mind, that's what we're after. And there's something, frankly, kind of greedy about it on my part, kind of acquisitive. I want to hear this stuff and I want to read it. I want to find out what's going to come out. But we've sustained this space. I'm very proud of that. It's not just me by any means, but we did it. We did it together.
Right. The another aspect of you, and this shows up in the book. I'm thinking of the ACDC piece,
yeah.
but the other component, another component that makes you is music. In particular, and I know this from being with you, loud music,
yes.
Extremely loud music. And
yes.
is that one of the antidotes to a depressive kind of?
Yeah. Can I read the end of? I'm going to read the end of my ACDC ode, actually, if I can.
I love the ACDC piece.
So we'll start. This is kind of towards the end of it, but there's a lot of kind of quite nitty gritty, nerdy stuff about ACDC, which might not be of that much interest if you're not an ACDC fan. But I end up seeing them finally. I end up seeing them at the Gillette Stadium outside Boston. By the time I finally saw them at the Gillette Stadium, home of the New England Patriots, it was 2015, a rough season for ACDC. The previous year, it had been announced that Malcolm Young, their great rhythm guitarist, 62, was suffering from dementia and could no longer continue in the band. Grotesque irony that Malcolm, author of the most unforgettable riffs in rock and roll, should now be unable to remember them. Then Phil Rudd, the drummer, was arrested and later convicted of drug possession and threatening to kill a former employee. Chris Slade was now on the drums, while Malcolm's slot was filled by his 58-year-old nephew, Stevie. So here we were, very, very far from the band's hooligan pomp. Now, more interestingly perhaps, and certainly more movingly, we were bearing witness to its wild senescence. Dusk fell, and the air cooled, and the great bowl of the Gillette Stadium scintillated with the restless, insectile blinking of 1,000 pairs of toy devil horns, tiny red lights everywhere. You could get your horns at the concession stand, all part of ACDC's jolly postmodern diabolism. Hell ain't a bad place to be. And there on the big screen was Angus, lead guitarist, with his pale, bare shins and his gibbering kneecaps and his head going up and down in a contemplative frenzy, a 60-year-old man dressed like a schoolboy. He struck his black Gibson, right arm lifting away from it in weightless tribute. It took a second for the sound to reach us, and in that time lag was the span of our adoration. Why in my life has the music of AC/DC been such a tonic, banisher of depressions, holy resource? I depend upon it. From holes it can pull me, from cellular sulks it can rouse and redeem me, and from the most maggoty fit of sloth. I'm not alone in this. Hundreds of thousands of people dose themselves similarly with the music of ACDC for a boost, for a buzz, for salvation. Why? Because it's a shaft of the absolute, attracted earthward and split into guitars, drums, voice by some vulgar and canny Australians. Because it shatters solipsism and makes sunkenness in the self impossible. Because in its bountiful, joyful, crass rock and roll immensity, it's the face of the everything that isn't me. That's why I like heavy metal. Thank you.
So you hear the opening chords of Highway to Hell, and you're instantly lifted.
Yes.
Instantly lifted out of whatever thing you're in.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, I mean, thank God, it's very simple. Yeah.
We're going to take questions in a minute, but you reminded me with gibbering kneecaps.
Yeah.
Reminded me, and I don't know that there's an answer to this question, but for writers, your it's almost unholy. Your unholy way you combine words. It's like a dark magic to a lot of us. We're all striving to find original ways of saying things that don't involve using ChatGPT 4. And we're always looking for an original way to phrase something. These pour out of you, and
They don't actually pour out.
well, tell us about that.
Okay, so I sit there in despair for 2 days, and I'd say to myself, this is it. You've done it. Now you've hit the wall. Now you're through the bottom of the barrel into the the silt at the in the basement floor, and it's over. That's it. But then eventually out of somewhere, some little bit of language will appear, which will then stick to another little bit of language, and that's how it starts to. It doesn't.
So it's often you go all the way down.
Oh yeah, all the way into absolutely being convinced that I can't do it.
Are you just saying this because you know that
No,
other
no.
writers hate writers for whom it comes easily?
No. If it poured out of me, I would tell you. But I mean, there's a moment, there's a little tiny ecstatic moment somewhere in there where where it clicks and you feel it beginning to come. But the beginning is always terrible.
And what is your writing time of day?
In the morning, I think in the morning, yeah.
By the afternoon, it's
gone. Yeah,
it's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone. I want to get some questions.
Can I just want to say, Jeff Goldberg, the Atlantic has, I don't know where I would be without the Atlantic, and you have looked after me, nurtured me, brought me into myself in a way that I cannot imagine occurring anywhere else. So anything that happens in there, much of it is down to you.
Well, that's very, very nice. But the thing you try to do as a magazine editor is you're trying to. Obviously, we're a pretty serious magazine. We're trying to illuminate big issues of the day. But if we're not delighting our readers at the same time, it just doesn't work. And so James is a big part of the delight of the. No one else could write about Four Seasons Total Landscaping quite the way some people would take thousands of words to say that to convey the same feeling that it took you so little time to do. If there are questions, any kinds of questions about the writing process. Yes, sir, over here. He's going to give you my.
Can you tell me more about your process of concentration to write? It sounds almost like a kind of a mindfulness. You stay focused.
It's actually it's very scattered.
Scattered?
I think so. Yeah, I probably have ADHD, honestly. I bounce between. I've always got music on. Always. I write in the.
You can write with music with singing, not just instrumental.
No.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I have to have music, and it's much better if I'm in a public place. Like I work in coffee shops because if I'm at home, I'll whatever the things one does at home. I'll eat, I'll fall asleep, I'll do the things one does. So I go out. So I have to keep my trousers on. I have to not pick my nose. I have to keep focused somewhat. I present as a writer at least, and then that gets me in the space. But it's all very scattershot until the thing starts to happen by itself.
Well, I work with teenagers in a high school, and
Yeah.
some of them, they listen to heavy metal. They describe that same process.
Yeah.
Now I understand it a little more.
Yeah, well, I think if you're of a certain disposition, you need something to sort of draw off the static a little bit, loud or something. So,
Have you made a link between particular songs, particular artists, and bursts of creativity?
no, I wish I could. I wish it was that easy. No,
There's just
that would be
with
great.
this one song.
Yeah, no. Hey,
Hello. Thank you so much for coming. I'm a big fan of your writing.
Thank
and of
you
the
for
Atlantic
coming.
In general,
Thank
I grew up reading a lot of it, so it's big for me. But
Thank
I
you.
wanted to ask. You said that you are based in the Boston area, which has a pretty distinct culture, especially within the greater U.S. culture, and especially among the blue-collar workers that you probably have kind of grown up with. How do you think that your interactions and your experiences there with those people have influenced your perspective on the U.S. and the odes that you do?
Well, Boston I love Boston. I'm a huge booster of Boston. I mean, that city has given me everything. My wife is from Boston. My son was born in Boston. The things that I've done in Boston, I just like the things that I've described. I don't like being a baker and then starting a homeless writers group in London. That just wouldn't have flown. Somehow I don't know. Or at least I wouldn't have flown in those situations. So I love Boston, and it's a small city as well, which I love because I feel like you can kind of keep the whole of it in your head. When you were talking about blue collar workers, there, one of the best, this one aside, interviews that I've done for this book was with Road Dog Radio on Sirius XM, which is the truckers' radio station. And the guy's, his name is Jimmy Mack, and he was, this present company accepted, the most literate, informed, into it dude I could have asked for. Do you know what I mean? He was like, I'm reading your prose. Do you listen to a lot of punk rock? Do you like the Minutemen? Because sometimes, like some of your rhythms. And then do you like Walker Percy? It reminds me of Lost in the Cosmos. Like all of my whole bloody reference board was just lighting up. And then he said, now there's a lot of young people out there. They're just starting on this great adventure of trucking. They're in their cabs right now. What do you want to say to them? So, I was like, I was like, well, I respect truckers. I've driven across this country. I didn't know what to say, but I just
Sounds like you're running for office. I respect truckers. Exactly. Without truckers, America doesn't move.
If you've got it, a truck brought it. No, so
what do you say to the truckers?
Yeah, Jimmy Hoffa. So no, but anyway, that's a really nice question. Thank you. I love that.
Anything else? Are there any? If somebody asks something else, are there any odes that you regret? In this?
No, there's no odes that I regret, but there are odes that I regret not having taken them to the next level. Like they didn't.
Which one? Like which one would you do?
Ode to brain farts, which is quite a good ode, but what it doesn't include is panic attacks, and that I think that's ultimate. But the panic attack is the ultimate brain fart to me. That's the complete annihilation.
Do you have them?
Oh, I used to, but that's the apocalyptic brain fart where you just like, who am I? What's happening? I've forgotten everything. So that is what I could feel.
Would you consider writing about it and not necessarily the ode form?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Just doing a little business, but everything's everything's material. No. It's one of the hardest things about being a writer is looking back and saying, I wish that were a little better. I wish I constructed that.
It happens. I mean, the nice.
It'd be fun to give people do-overs, actually.
Well, yeah. The nice thing about writing the Atlantic is that they you've got the headline and then the subhead, which is written for you by your editor, and quite often the subhead will actually say what I should have said in the piece, but couldn't quite get there.
The distillation.
Yeah, but that's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Purest distillation.
Yeah.
And most of those are pulled from the piece to be
sometimes,
to be fair.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else? Yes, sir, in the front.
Can I just ask James?
I hear. You have the.
Thanks.
Yeah.
A lot of the odes are poems, which I think I love. I think it's fantastic, and I just wondered if you could say a few things about some of your favorite poets. I mean, I think a lot of them are English, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with poets who rhyme. I mean, one of my favorite poets is American Ogden Nash, Stevie Smith, Walter de la Mare, Frederick Seidel, I mean, I've got a million poets, but when I write, I mean, I'll be banging bits of language about, and when they start rhyming, that's basically when I know I'm writing.
I'll read a very, very short one. No. I'll read a very, very short one that actually, it's like kind of a straight shot to the heart of writer woe, in a kind of way, because this is what we all want. This is called Ode to Wanting to Be a Great Poet. Oh, let me write a deathless lyric like A.E. Housman or Robert Herrick. Just one, just for fun, and then I'm done. But there is this thing where you just want one perfect sentence.
Yeah, and there's also this idea. It's a ridiculous idea, but I do have it. Like if you wrote a perfect poem, that would be it. You'd feel complete. You'd feel achieved. No poet has ever felt that, I don't think. But it's, I persist in the fantasy that if I'd written.
It's very funny. I can ask you management advice in front of this audience right now, because I have a writer who doesn't want to finish a piece because
he's caught in a state of infinite potentiality.
Because not only, but if this person gets it right, this person feels that will be the ultimate statement of this person's life, and therefore there will be nothing else to do. And if you get it wrong, it's the abyss.
Yeah.
And so there's something I haven't figured out what the, again, with this one psychological trick, I'll get you to unblock.
Just say, dude, you're not that good.
It's not really all about you, is it?
Yeah.
Pretty damn good person, though. If I told you who it was,
no,
you'd be like,
yeah, he or she.
Yeah.
But but you have to, there's at a certain point you have. That's one of the lovely things about journalism. You are forced to sign off on. You have to be little bit less precious.
Right. It's not perfect. It's perfect at 6 o'clock when it has to be done.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you might feel a bit regretful later.
Right. Is there anything else? We're going to have a signing. Oh. Huh? That's Janice, our copy chief. If you have questions, she loves answering questions about grammar. So please just line up. She's one of the many people who makes it all work, obviously. But talk about finally. Well, actually, two final things for me. One is if you're talking to young writers out here, and you're obviously you can't give them a complete reading list, but what are the 5 things you would tell people to read? To understand what the potential are, or to understand how words work together.
I would say "Revolution in the Head" by Ian MacDonald, which is a book about the Beatles. It's just like the best writing about music and music as sound. He's a beautiful writer. Lester Bangs, amazing music critic. I read. Oh my God, Beowulf by Seamus Heaney. I mean, there's a million. I mean, I heard.
Is there anything that's go-to for you? Just like
Michael Hoffman, the critic. I find him really inspiring, just because he's just very idiosyncratic. Everything that all of his responses feel genuine. There's nothing like pre-programmed. The herd instinct is not present in him. Anything that makes you feel alive, anything that makes you feel like your own stuff is coming to the surface, then you're in business, I think.
My last question for you is a question that sort of looms over our magazine, our industry, our civilization.
AI? Oh, no.
What?
Don't ask me about AI.
I'm not going to ask you about AI. You're like the least. Show everybody your phone.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Watch this. This is a power move, everybody. Watch the power move. And it's rotary, by the way. He has the only rotary flip phone. It takes 10 minutes to make a local call. That's a cure for insanity. The question is what, and you don't have to know a definitive answer, but are you hopeful about the future of let's call it literary writing?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's a neurological necessity, biological necessity for the human race. I don't think there's any getting away. I mean, there is getting away from it, but the result is disaster. If you switch off that level of perception, level of consciousness, level of awareness, then you're amputating part of your nature, I think.
That's a great answer.
Is
That was
it?
fantastic. Yeah, I'll end there. This is
that out of
this is
my
fantastic. You know, one of my fondest wishes. I want everyone at the Atlantic to be hugely successful and hugely famous. One of my fondest wishes is that everybody gets to read you. And thank you all for coming and meeting the wonderful James Parker.
Thank you, everybody.
And he'll sign books.
Yes.
Somewhere. Thank you to Politics and Prose, by the way, for being here on the wharf, too.